On April 26, 1986, at exactly 1:23 in the morning, a routine safety test at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine went catastrophically wrong. The reactor's core became unstable, and within seconds, two massive explosions destroyed reactor number 4, blasting its giant concrete lid into the air and shooting radioactive debris into the night sky. Dozens of brave firefighters rushed to the scene with no idea they were walking directly into invisible, deadly radiation, and without any protective gear. Plant workers and engineers knew the situation was extremely dangerous. Yet many chose to stay behind, trying to contain a disaster they didn't fully understand. Within hours of the explosion, Soviet officials were informed, but instead of warning the public, they made a chilling decision: keep it secret. Just 3 kilometers away, the 50,000 residents of Pripyat woke up the next morning completely unaware that a nuclear disaster had already begun poisoning the air around them. Inside the shattered reactor, an even greater threat was building. The superhot nuclear core was in danger of causing a second, even more devastating steam explosion that could have wiped out all of Europe. 3 volunteer engineers agreed to dive into flooded, radioactively contaminated water beneath the reactor and manually open drain valves, a mission that almost certainly meant their deaths, but they did it anyway. Meanwhile, Soviet military helicopters flew hundreds of missions over the burning, open reactor, dropping sand, lead, and boron by hand to try to smother the nuclear fire below. For 2 full days after the explosion, the Soviet government did not say a single word to the outside world. Phone lines were monitored, news was censored, and the truth was buried behind the Iron Curtain. But the Soviet government forgot one thing. They could silence people, but they could not silence the wind, and an invisible radioactive cloud was already drifting northwest across all of Europe. On the morning of April 28th, 2 days after the explosion, a chemist named Cliff Robinson arrived for a shift at the Forsmark Nuclear Power Plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers away from Chernobyl. When he walked through the routine radiation detector at the entrance, the alarm started screaming, and the source of contamination was traced to radioactive particles on the soles of his own shoes. Within minutes, every single worker passing through the detector was triggering the alarm, and the entire plant was evacuated in a panic as engineers scrambled to find out if Forsmark itself was leaking. After checking every pipe, every valve, and every reactor at Forsmark, scientists confirmed the plant was completely clean, which meant the radiation was coming from somewhere else entirely. Swedish radiation experts analyzed the specific radioactive isotopes and matched them to wind patterns from the past 72 hours, and the trail pointed directly to the Soviet Union. The Swedish government immediately contacted Moscow and demanded answers. Confronting Soviet officials with hard scientific data they could not deny or explain away. After an entire day of pressure from Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark, the Soviet news agency TASS finally released a 44-word statement. An accident has occurred at the Chernobyl atomic power station. That tiny, vague statement was enough to ignite a global firestorm. Within hours, news of the Chernobyl disaster was being broadcast on television sets in every country on Earth. Radiation at these extreme levels doesn't just make you feel sick. It penetrates every cell in your body, destroys your DNA, and breaks down your immune system from the inside out. The condition caused by absorbing massive doses of radiation in a very short time is called acute radiation syndrome, and the men who fought the Chernobyl fire in the first hours were already suffering it without knowing. In the days and weeks following the disaster, the first responders, the firefighters and plant workers who had no protective equipment, began dying one by one from radiation poisoning. Doctors treating the victims faced a terrifying problem. Because workers had no dosimeters at night, nobody knew exactly how much radiation each person had received, making treatment almost impossible to calibrate. The most critically ill patients were rushed from the small Pripyat hospital to Moscow's Hospital No. 6, the Soviet Union's only specialist radiation treatment facility, where 148 men were already fighting for their lives. It took the Soviet government 36 hours after the explosion to finally order the evacuation of Pripyat, telling residents to take only what they could carry because they would be gone for just 3 days. Across Europe, governments were furious. Poland, Finland, and Denmark had all detected dangerously elevated radiation levels, but were given no warning by the Soviets, putting millions of civilians at unnecessary risk. It wasn't until May 14th, 18 days after the explosion, that Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev finally appeared on television to address his own people about what had actually happened. The Chernobyl disaster forced the world to create new international laws. The Convention on Early Notification of a Nuclear Accident, which legally required any country to immediately warn the world if a nuclear disaster occurred. Today, the 1,600 square mile Chernobyl exclusion zone remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth, and the abandoned city of Pripyat stands as a permanent, silent reminder of what happens when governments choose secrecy over human lives. The story of how the world found out about Chernobyl is ultimately the story of one pair of contaminated shoes, proof that no government, no matter how powerful, can keep the truth hidden when physics itself refuses to cooperate.